Good morning. My name is Terry Allen. Welcome. I want to talk about Glass-Steagall, something that we need to talk more about. Uh, During the election, it was talked about quite a bit. Bernie Sanders was definitely for it. Um, it's a very important piece of legislation that should be passed, should be reinstated actually, because we did have it for many years. Um, Glass-Steagall was a banking regulation act that was passed in 1933 after the Great Depression, and they had come up with some ideas on how to keep from having another depression. So what they did, what caused the Great Depression actually, was the banks were taking depositors' money, checking accounts, savings accounts, pension funds, and they were gambling with it on the stock market. Well, as everybody knows, in 1929 the stock market crashed, and so the banks lost much of that money. A lot of depositors were getting 10 cents on the dollar. There were bank runs. Um, Banks were shut down, closed. I think they closed for 4 days actually. When they reopened, depositors really got screwed, basically. So, what the Glass-Steagall Act does is it creates a firewall between bankers' deposits, customers' deposits, business deposits, savings, and pension funds. It keeps separate from the financial houses of Wall Street. And what that does is keeps Wall Street from gambling with that money on in securities and gambling with on the stock market, futures and derivatives and all the crazy stuff that goes on over there at Wall Street. Um, so it was enacted and it did work. They created the FDIC also at that time, which was a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which protected deposits up to $100,000, which they felt if they did that, it would prevent bank runs. And it did pretty well. I think one that did happen was Washington Mutual. Back in 2008, the bank run depleted all their deposits, $16 billion, I think. Anyway, so it worked in 1999. Bankers, the big banks, lobbied and lobbied and lobbied until I guess the Congress broke down and went ahead and repealed it and put in place some piece of garbage that basically didn't do anything. And so the banks had been lobbying for this since the early 80s to deregulate, you know, because they made the excuse that they needed all this extra money to compete with the world market, world banks, London banks, Swiss bank accounts, etc., like that. So what they did was that allowed the financial houses to merge with the commercial banks. And so you can see what happened. Within 9 years, they had crashed the economy. They had taken mortgages and deposits and had used them on the stock market to make big profits that helped finance these factory closings and moving offshore, where the owners make big profits and the workers and the middle class get laid off and basically wiped out. But Wall Street never cared about that kind of thing. Their motivation is purely greed and profit. I think that's pretty clear now. So, anybody watched the movie The Big Short? That was a great movie. I enjoyed it. They really got it pretty close as to what really happened. What they were doing was they discovered that they could take these mortgages and they could wrap them up into bundles and create securities which they could sell. And they could have, there was derivatives all over the place, you know, based on all this stuff. So they basically created a bunch of money out of nothing. And but they needed this cash flow. They needed this flow of the mortgages coming in. And so when they used up a lot of them, they lowered their standards. and I had this argument with a conservative friend of mine, which really, it's ridiculous. Okay, he says, well, if all these poor people hadn't taken all these loans out, um, then this wouldn't have happened. Well, that's ludicrous. Okay, he said, well, it was the government that decided, the Obama government decided that they wanted the poor people to have houses and stuff. Well, that's also a joke because this stuff happened under Bush. Obama came in on the tail end of this. So, so basically what they did was they started giving loans to people that didn't even have jobs. There was a joke where if they had a pulse, they could get a housing loan. People were getting these loans, which were called interest-only 5-year ARM loans, which you only had to pay the interest payments and no principal, which would lower your payments quite a bit. The problem with that is that in 5 years, you have to your mortgage gets the payment schedule gets changed, and suddenly they push in payments on the principal. Your mortgage payment goes way up, and in many cases, people were not able to pay that. But the mortgage brokers had said, and this actually happened to me personally because I needed to get some cash out of my house back in 2006, I think it was, and they wanted me to take one of these 5-year ARM interest-only loans. Well, after looking at it, I decided that it was a bad idea, and I stuck with 30-year fixed. And I am glad because within 2 years, my payment would have, I mean, when the whole thing crashed, and after that, my payment would have gone way up. So, if you watch this movie, what these people did was they started giving loans to everybody. People had multiple loans for multiple houses, not things that they could possibly afford. They were coming up with these crazy investments to rent them out, and the housing bubble got bigger and bigger. House prices went way up. People were getting these huge loans, and they were packaging these things as securities. Well, a few people started looking at this over there and started saying, wait a minute, the defaults are starting to rise. They said, I think deposits normally were about 1%, defaults about 1% on mortgages. Well, it started to get up close to 4%. And they saw an opportunity to short the mortgage market. Well, the banks thought that was ridiculous because mortgages have never gone down, never collapsed. It's the safest investment ever, and they were getting AAA ratings. Well, once these defaults started to kick in, these things became less valuable, but they got Standard & Poor to give AAA ratings still to these securities that weren't nearly as good. They even had a lot of subprime loans in them, which are B-rated, even lower than that even. It ended up in the end where the securities were absolutely worthless. There was no possible way they could pay off, but they were still getting the AAA rating because they started to create fraud at that point because they didn't want the thing to collapse because then they would get wiped out. So they started defrauding, and they started trying to sell this stuff off quickly to unknowing purchasers like pension funds and teachers unions and different organizations that bought securities because of the higher interest rate, and they thought, well, if it's mortgage backed, it was not risky. And so I think this whole thing unraveled in about 2 days. The whole thing went down. Paulson and Bernanke and these crazy idiots, these Milton Freemanites, went to Congress and basically said, well, you need to bail us out, otherwise the entire world economy will crash and the world will go into chaos, which was basically right. These banks were too big to fail. And so that's why we need Glass-Steagall, because we can break up these banks again, and no longer will they be too big to fail. It's estimated, I mean, originally, remember, they needed about $800 billion. Well, it's estimated, I think, that they ended up with about $4 or $5 trillion over the last few years. Keep bailing these banks out, and it's off-sheet balanced part of the budget, so you don't really see, we haven't really seen the effects of this, but it's because they're just printing the money anyway. It's not even printing, actually. It's just numbers in a computer now. So I'm all for that. Bernie Sanders was for that. Trump was for it. He even said during the campaign that he would like to see Glass-Steagall reinstated. But, of course, that has not happened, and I'm beginning to wonder if maybe somebody got to Trump. Let's say the CIA comes into the White House and says, Mr. Trump, we want to show you something. And they pull out a camera, a video, and they play him a video of the Kennedy assassination. And then they say, any questions? So it's pretty implied as to you need to go along with what we say, or otherwise you have to face consequences. So what he's been doing is gone against probably every promise that he made. He was going to be working with the Russians in Syria, going after ISIS. Well, now we're back doing the same thing Obama and Hillary Clinton did. We're backing ISIS against the Assad regime. There has not been any evidence, any hard evidence that Assad gassed his own people, which is always the thing that they use. They use that against Saddam Hussein. They make up all this BS, and then they use it as an excuse to go in and bomb and kill and destroy things. One of the arguments I have with my conservative friend also is about this whole budget process and how he thinks that liberals have destroyed the country. And I agree that that our media is liberal, or just wacky. I don't know if liberal would really be the word. The media is owned by major corporations, and so of course they're not going to give you the real truth if it affects profits of the multinational corporations, as you can imagine. So what we have basically is a situation where we are spending trillions and trillions of dollars on war. Trump's new budget slashes and slashes in all the domestic programs. Oh my God. But let's give more money to the rich, and let's give more money to the war machine, because we need to fight this unending war with the terrorists. Oh, Jesus. You know, this is... Haven't these people learned anything? Are they out of their minds? Yes, they must be. I mean, there's no other explanation for it. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people do we need to murder in the name of patriotism and getting rid of terrorism? It's ridiculous. Every terrorist that you kill, even if they're not a terrorist or whatever they are, Muslim, fundamentalist, radical, whatever they are, you create 10 new terrorists. You kill people in someone's family. What are they going to do? I mean, of course they're going to retaliate. I mean, every movie that comes out of Hollywood, it's all about some vigilante. You know, his family was killed, and so he's going on to a killing spree. I mean, it's a very common theme, but it is true in many cases. These people have nothing to lose anyway, and I think I mentioned it before, but the reason that we're actually in Syria against Assad is that Saudi Arabia, our buddy friends, one of the worst regimes in the Middle East, actually, for their human rights violations, want to build a pipeline, natural gas pipeline through Syria into Europe. Well, Russia already supplies much of the natural gas into Europe. So that's why Russia doesn't want the pipeline. We want it because we're buddy with Saudi Arabians, the Saudi regime. So there you go. It's, you know, so how many hundreds of thousands of people did we kill over a pipeline? When you think about it, it's absolutely sick, disgusting. It's war crimes. That's what this is. That's what the definition of a war crime is when you kill people over lies and misleading information, you know, have preemptive wars. This is all the definition of war crimes. And what makes these people any different than the Nazis, honestly? Nothing much, I would say. So, back to Glass-Steagall. We need it. we got to have it. So need to pressure Congressman. I believe our congressman out here is for it, and Brad Sherman. He's definitely for it. He voted against the bailout of the banks. He's pretty good guy out here in San Bernardino Valley. So contact your congressmen and their senators. Say we need Glass-Steagall now. Break up these stupid banks. They cannot be too big to fail. They're bigger now than after 2008. Obama was a nightmare. This thing is out of control. This is a mess. It's going to collapse again, and who knows what it's going to be next time. These people, Wall Street, are dying to have Social Security money. They would do anything to get that money, and they would churn through that sucker in a year. That thing would all be gone, and then where would we stand? You know. So Glass-Steagall needs to be reinstated now. Subscribe if you want. Comment if you want. Do whatever you want. Don't care. It's up to you. All right. Have a good day. Thank you very much for listening. See ya. Bye.